day everyone, and thank you for joining us on our next module in the distance learning program with regards to fall armyworm. Today's module, we are discussing economic and action thresholds for fall armyworm control. This module is presented by Professor Johnny van der Berg, the Manager of Integrated Pest Program at the Northwest University. Thank you, Johnny.
Good day, everybody, and welcome to this module. This module is challenging in the sense that we are addressing a complex system or a complex problem, which is economic thresholds. So we are going to try and explain to farmers a cost-benefit concept, but we'll address that as we go along during this lecture. So the following subtopics are dealt with in this presentation. And before I start with that, I'd like to remind you, all the trainers, that in the PDF that you can access on this website, in the PDF that you can access below each of the slides that I show in this presentation, there is a lot of text giving more detailed information and suggesting things that you could discuss with farmers, tell them to prompt some questions, etc. For each of the slides that I show. So the topics we deal with today are threshold levels and what they are used for, the risk of yield loss, and we come back to this thing we've repeated so many times, the importance of scouting, and then the effect of pest pressure and plant age and climate on management decisions, because thresholds and management decisions go hand in hand. And this blue text, like in all of our slides, prompt certain questions that you as a trainer can ask the farmers. You can, for example, ask, when do you think you should spray? When you see symptoms for the first time, do you think it's acceptable or effective to do preventative control? Just to stimulate a little bit of thinking and discussion before you continue with the lecture or the training that you will give to the farmers. The important points that you should highlight and that I want to emphasize is that thresholds lead to a better timing of application, scouting, and then we have an action threshold. So effective and economic control, and remember I say economic because we're talking about a benefit, we're talking about money today. Economical control relies on these different points that I have here. So it is very difficult to make specific recommendations on what and when a farmer should apply a pesticide. There are so many different field level scenarios, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. It all depends on where the farm is situated. Is it in the humid tropics? Is the pest does the pest cause reinfestation? Does it continue from seedling to crop stage? Or if the farm is situated in an ecoregion where the night temperature is cool, the pests have a long life cycle, so reinfestation will not be likely under such conditions. So we cannot make specific recommendations on when a farmer should apply a pesticide, but today's lecture is about providing guidelines, thresholds that can guide in this decision-making process. And an important message that you should convey to farmers is that damage, like the symptoms you see there, and they are all familiar with that, damage does not equate to yield loss. Plants can sustain a significant level of damage such as this or leaf damage, but the plant does not necessarily lose yield. And the question we all ask, which is extremely difficult to answer, is how much yield loss does fall armyworm cause? And that is something that the farmer must estimate before a chemical control application is made. So when is an insecticide application economically warranted? And the things that I discuss now does not only apply to fall armyworm, it's actually against all pests. And I'll refer a little bit to stem borers as well at a later stage. So when is it warranted? Before we get to that, we have to understand what thresholds are and what they are used for. Threshold levels are used for one purpose only: to decide whether it's warranted to apply the insecticide or not. So in the context of fall armyworm, a threshold value prompts a decision, and after a decision is made, it is followed by an action or a non-action, and you'll see the details come. It will become more clear as we go. So there are different types of thresholds, and unfortunately, we talk loose and fast when we refer to thresholds. There are economic thresholds, action thresholds, and detection thresholds. And I would like to explain a little bit about each of them. Now, this is a lot of theoretical things I'm going into now, but it's necessary for you as a trainer to understand the underlying principles when you teach farmers about thresholds. And in the notes below these slides, in the PDF copy that you can print out, is a lot of information that you can convey to farmers. So an economic threshold level or the injury level is the population density where the cost of control equals economic loss, and we do not want to reach the economic injury level, and therefore we have an economic threshold level. So when a farmer sprays too early or at a very low infestation level, he's wasting his money, and the benefit does not exceed the loss that you will get, so he loses his money. But one thing we've seen in Africa with the outbreak of this devastating pest is that governments provided insecticides free of charge. So if a farmer does not have to pay for any insecticide, threshold levels are really irrelevant if it's free. Farmers will not consider threshold. So this is not a very good practice. Then we have the detection threshold. These are used by farmers, and it really only indicates when the pest is present in the field, and that must prompt other actions. And the important part is the action threshold. These are not formal values, but guidelines that was developed after experts were consulted. So it's expert opinion on the topic of thresholds. And these thresholds are described and also provided with a lot of other detail in the Fall Armyworm IP guide for Africa, IPM guide for Africa, which I'm sure many of you will have, but it is also available on this site and on the internet. So the action threshold we are talking about is, for example, when 20% of the plants on a field show damage, 20% of the fields, then the farmer must apply a pesticide. So these thresholds vary, of course. At different plant ages, we have different threshold levels. So we have plant age-based thresholds, which I'll go into detail later on. But just a little bit more theory on the threshold to explain the principle. So this graph shows you how dynamic a situation might be. On this axis, we have the age of the crop, for example, weeks after seedling emergence. On the y-axis, we have the percentage infested plants, which the farmer must calculate through scouting. So what we want to prevent is that over time, the number of damaged plants exceeds the threshold level. And that is when the farmer must take action. There's a control action, and then the farmer must apply a pesticide, and the worms will die, and there will be very few larvae left after the application. Of course, with fall armyworm, the number of plants that you determine, the percentage of damaged plants will not decrease because the damage symptoms doesn't go away. It's the pest that dies. So we want to prevent the pest from becoming economically important in a particular field, and therefore we use an action threshold. So action thresholds are most commonly used because we are not doing a complicated calculation that involves yield potential, cost of control, cost of the maize price, etc. Action thresholds can be determined for different plant growth stages because damage and yield loss are influenced by plant age at the time of infestation, the pest pressure, so how many plants are damaged on a field, how big are the larvae, are there eggs present, or all of those, the value of the crop in money terms, because the farmer must estimate that, and believe it or not, the weather also influences how a farmer should decide whether to control or not. So why do you scout for fall army damage? It's a decision support tool to firstly determine if the pest is there and how many plants are infested, and then to decide if control is needed or not. So the farmer must ask questions, and you should convey this message to them. Before they take a decision whether to apply pesticide or not, they should first determine how many plants on a field show damage. That is calculated as a percentage. And in order to do that, they have to scout, and there's another module, module 3, on monitoring and scouting of fall armyworm. So after that process, the farmer must answer the question, how severe are the symptoms? Is there a lot of damage? And they can add information such as larval sizes, are egg batches present, etc. And then what do you do with this information? You use it to make a decision. And this slide I show has got different sections to it. So a threshold level implies taking action. So there's a question. What is the question? Is fall armyworm present in the field? That's done with reconnaissance scouting. The answer can be yes or no. If the answer is no, there's an action. You do nothing. If the answer is yes, you determine the percentage infested plants, and then there's a guide, which I'll talk about later, a threshold and a decision guide. If the percentage infested plants is lower than 20%, there's a certain action. If it's higher than 20%, there's another action. And this is only a hypothetical example. So following on the decision, there must be action. If the threshold, for example, is low, or the number of infested plants are low, you do nothing. If you have access to ash and you have time to ash and soil, if you think this will be effective, you can apply it to the wheels to control or to suppress larval development and kill a few larvae. But if the threshold is if the number is above the threshold, you have to apply the pesticide. And then afterwards, you can monitor the efficacy of that application as well. So how is the threshold used? The farmer, and I repeat the process, it's a process, a thought process the farmer goes through. Are there damaged plants in the maize field? Yes or no? What is the infestation level? In other words, how many plants are damaged? How old are the plants? What growth stage? Is the infestation level higher or lower than the action threshold for that specific growth stage? Then a pesticide should be applied. After general scouting, detailed scouting should be done. Detection, the pest is detected, then the farmer plans to scout, and he scouts and he determines the percentage infested plants. And from experience, we have seen that the percentage is nearly always overestimated, and therefore insecticides are in many cases applied unnecessarily. And this is what we want to prevent, because it has all these other associated disadvantages like resistance evolution and environmental impacts. So this slide explains the growth stages to you because plants are more sensitive at a certain stage. And this is important to know when we work with plant age-based thresholds. During the young stages of the maize plant, from emergence to V6, plants are very sensitive and the fall armyworm larvae can actually kill them. And then They are more tolerant during the mid-development period, and then just when tasseling starts, those are the VT to R3 stages, the tassel and early crop stages. If infestation happens then, there can be a lot of damage caused by the larvae. So now we have covered scouting, determining the percentage, and the farmer understands the importance of distinguishing different plant growth stages, which brings us to the actual action thresholds that are based on plant age. Now, this is the first slide in this presentation that shows the actual action thresholds. Now, these figures usually create a lot of discussion and unease amongst farmers if you tell them to wait until 20% of the plants on their field must be damaged before it warrants any insecticide application. If you tell them that taller plants that are 6 or 7 weeks old, mature plants, you can only apply, it's only warranted to apply at 50% infestation, they will not believe it. But as I told you, it's usually overestimated, and it's not always that we get such high levels. So with these action thresholds, expert opinion indicates that the threshold is when 20% of the seedlings show damage, a farmer can apply a pesticide. But of course, there's a range and there's leeway built into the system. So it can actually be anywhere between 10 and 30%. Then the farmer should start applying pesticides. And on older plants, which are in the reproductive stage, the threshold is 20%. Again, here you can see taller plants, 5 to 7 weeks old or so. You can wait until 50% is damaged before you spray. But then there's a lower threshold again when the plants are older. And I'll get to that a little bit later because, but this reduced threshold is because the ears will now be attacked and that can lead to increased yield loss. So this slide provides a summary of all the factors that are directly and indirectly considered during the decision-making process. But so this is specific to each farmer's situation. The growth stage is considered. Is the plant in the seedling or mature stage? How high is the pest pressure? Are there eggs there or are the larvae already very big? What does the weather forecast say? Will there be rainstorms very soon? Because this influences pest survival under natural conditions. And I will address several of these issues further on. So whether the pest is present or not is determined by looking at clusters of small window panes, which gives the indication that the pest is in the field. So the farmer detects this and then he has to scout. So, and based on the scouting result, he has to make a management decision. And I repeat the figures that I gave in the table here. The threshold to decide whether to spray or not is 20% at the seedling stage. This is a little bit earlier than this, but there you can see on this picture on the left, a younger plant. Small pinnels are present in the leaves of the whorl, and that is what the farmer needs to scout for. Otherwise, he will observe the pest too late. And when the plants are more mature than the one on the picture on the left, the threshold is only at 50%. But the picture on the right shows very young and tender maize cobs pushing out the silk. These ears are very soft, these cobs, and the threshold is 20% during this stage, where the farmer then should apply when he sees that level of pest damage. But only looking at damage and the presence of worms in the field, that's not the only option. Some of you may be so lucky to have a moth pheromone trap network in an area, and you can use this also as an indicator of when to start scouting in order to make a decision regarding pest control. So The number of moths that you catch in these traps indicates egg laying intensity. Is the moth count high or low? That means that if it's very low in the beginning of the season, you're not going to be likely to spray very quickly, and it means that you start scouting. Is the moth count increasing or decreasing? And I urge farmers to record the type of thing that they see, the infestation levels. And record keeping is very important in pest management, and you as a trainer should attempt to get farmers to keep record about these type of things and their observations. And I think it was also mentioned in some of the other modules we did. So when the management decision has to be made, the farmer must consider the plant growth stage. There's a more sensitive stage in the beginning and towards tasseling. So consider the weather. That is something that you can tell farmers. If the temperature is high, they should be vigilant because the pest reproduces very quickly, it grows rapidly and can cause a lot of damage. Because fall armyworm develops fast at high temperatures. How does the rain forecast influence a farmer's decision? It has been observed and reported many times that heavy rain kill almost all of the small worms in the maize wills. They wash out and they drown. So if there's a rain forecast, thunder showers and so on, you may want to change your decision to spray or not. So if a farmer sees he's close to the economic threshold, he's considering to spray, but there's a thunderstorm on the way, the decision can be postponed for a few days. And after the rainstorm, scouting should be done again to see how many larvae survived and if the decision to spray should still be the same. So this is a very dynamic process that the farmer must get used to, and that you must tell them to document and think about it. It's not just when you see the first signs of damage, then you should control the pest. The following slides describe different examples or scenarios under which decision making is influenced by either yield potential of the crop and pest pressure. And the first example is the following. A field with a very high value crop. In other words, the maize is doing excellent. There was fertilizer applied, rain or moisture is not limiting, and the farmer expects a very high yield. And there is high infestation pressure. Under such conditions, farmers, and this comes from practice, farmers can plan to apply 4 to 6 applications, but they should scout before they do those applications. If it's a high value crop, it's worth it to spend money on an insecticide application because you're sure you are protecting a very high yield. And these 4 to 6 applications can begin 2 weeks after planting with 10 or 2 week intervals. Of course, this is not the ideal, but this is what we've seen happening in the field. A very high value crop with high pest pressure. The other example is a low value crop with low pest pressure. Now, if the farmer knows he's not going to harvest a lot, it means his income will be low, and therefore he should be careful in considering whether he should spray or not, because the likelihood of him making a financial loss increases drastically if the crop value is low. So with a low value crop, a maximum of 1 spray, also based on scouting, may be warranted, but it's important to scout carefully at tasseling, especially before an application is made. Under no circumstance can an application be made when the first signs of damage are observed. In another example, it's a high value crop with a low pest pressure. In an area where there's a high value crop, farmers might be more well off, or there might be better infrastructure maybe, and there may be moth traps around which can be used to indicate the trends in pest infestation. Under such conditions, the farmer can plan to apply 3 to 4 sprays, each based on scouting, but he doesn't need to apply 3 to 4. The decision is changed as the season goes. Under such conditions, scouting should start early, and there should also be this 2-week interval between sprays based on scouting. It's important to start at the tassel stage. That's where you want to aim your first spray if there's a low intensity infestation. And the second spray at early crop development, but again, only if your first spray didn't take out the whole pest population. So there's a lot of decision making in this whole process. And then a very low value crop with a high infestation pressure. If a farmer can only afford 1 spray, the best would be to postpone it until the crops start developing and spray just before tasseling. If he can afford 2 sprays, the first one should be applied at the sealing stage, but only if the pest is present there and according to the 20% threshold level. So you can see it's a complicated process, and it's done on a site field specific basis. We cannot give general recommendations always. So if a farmer decides to spray, there can be a broadcast spray directed over the row, all of the rows, intended to control the small worms, or spot sprays can be done directed into the whorl of the plant for control of large worms, which is very difficult to control. But the decision should be based on thresholds all the time. Now the cob sprays should be directed at the base of the cob because that's where the worms hide and feed largely, again based on the threshold. And I come back to the high risk growth stages because we are working with an action threshold based on plant age. So there are 2 windows of opportunities that fall armyworm have to create a lot of damage, cause a lot of damage. Seedling stages, and during on those young plants, 20% infestation warrants a chemical control application. And when we talk about reproductive plants that look like this, they are in the reproductive phase, the tasseling is happening, the flowers of the plants are starting to emerge. This is the other very sensitive stage because the tassel of the maize plant, the flower, pushes out the worms that live in the whorl. There's no more soft whorl tissue left for them to feed. So the worms climb out of the maize whorls when tasseling happens, and they climb down and they start feeding on the ears. That is why this is the other sensitive stage in the growth period of a maize plant. So this is why farmers need to be very aware of the infestation levels and the size of larvae just before and during tasseling. So the threshold there is then they should apply insecticide when 20% of the plants are infested. When farmers see this type of damage, it is too late to apply any control measures. There's no way in which they can kill these types of larvae, and it doesn't even help that they now want to determine the incidence of infested plants in a field and want to use a threshold. So I'm ending this presentation now by just summarizing. Scouting is important. Farmers must be made aware that they shouldn't apply insecticide at the first signs of damage, but like you see in this slide, they can also apply it too late. And that is what we do not want. So you can end your training session by asking the farmers, for example, at what infestation level now do they think that control is warranted? Do they think it is acceptable or effective to apply preventative control? And if they say yes, you ask them why is it acceptable to apply preventative control, because the pest is not even there. And this can result in a lot of discussion about when to make applications. So the bottom line is insecticides cost money, and the economic threshold must consider that input, the benefit that the crop has, the weather condition, the plant growth stages, etc. And I wish you all the best in conveying this complicated message to farmers. Thank you very much.